Have you ever felt invisible? Like no matter how hard you try, the world just walks past you. No support, no safety net, no second chances. Maybe you grew up with nothing. Maybe you were told you're not good enough. Maybe your dreams were laughed at before they even began. This story is for you, because this is not just a business story. It's a story about pain, rejection, and the quiet decision to never give up. If you've ever felt unseen, misunderstood, or underestimated, comment 1 right now. Let's begin. Some people are born into comfort. Others are born into survival. Howard Schultz belonged to the second group. He entered the world in 1953, not surrounded by opportunity, but by limitation. His childhood home was a government housing project in Brooklyn, a place where families lived one paycheck away from collapse. Dreams were not encouraged there. Stability was rare. Hope was fragile. His father worked as a delivery driver. It was honest work, but it offered no protection, no benefits, no security. One winter day, everything changed. His father slipped on ice and seriously injured his hip. That single accident ended his ability to work. There was no compensation, no medical care. No one stepped in to help. Howard watched his father fall, not just physically, but emotionally. A man who once carried pride now sat silently, defeated, ashamed. As a child, Howard didn't understand policies or systems, but he understood pain. He understood what it meant to be invisible. That moment stayed with him. Growing up poor is not just about money. It's about feeling small. Howard felt it when he avoided bringing friends home. He felt it when he wore the same clothes too many times. He felt it when he realized his family had no safety net. Years later, he would say that poverty leaves a shadow that never fully disappears. But that shadow did not break him. It shaped him. Howard learned early that nothing would be handed to him. He had no connections, no powerful name, no shortcuts. If he wanted something, he would have to fight for it. And so he did. He worked odd jobs. He sold newspapers. He played sports. He learned discipline, effort, and endurance long before he learned business. What he wanted was not luxury. What he wanted was dignity. Pain may shape direction, but it does not create opportunity. Action does. As Howard Schultz grew older, he began to understand a hard truth. Determination alone is meaningless unless it is applied. Wanting a better life was not enough. He needed a way forward, even if that path was narrow and uncertain. He was not surrounded by role models. No one in his family had gone to college. No one could show him how success worked. So he learned by doing. He worked wherever he could. He played sports not because it was easy, but because it taught discipline and resilience. Every small job became training. Every setback became preparation. Eventually, against the odds, Howard became the first person in his family to attend college. Not through privilege, not through wealth, but through effort. He earned a football scholarship to Northern Michigan University, a school far from the centers of power and influence. There were no shortcuts waiting for him there either. College life was demanding. The scholarship covered tuition, but not life. Howard worked as a bartender. He sold products door to door. He learned how to speak to strangers, how to handle rejection, how to stand confidently even when he felt uncertain inside. Without realizing it, he was building skills that no classroom could teach. He did not graduate with a sense of arrival. He graduated with awareness. He saw how far he still had to go. But for the first time, he also saw that movement was possible. After college, Howard joined Xerox as a sales representative. At the time, Xerox was famous for its rigorous sales training. The environment was competitive, structured, and demanding. Howard thrived there. He learned how to listen before speaking, how to understand what people truly wanted, and how to earn trust rather than force agreement. He was successful by every external measure: good performance, clear career path, financial stability. Yet something inside him remained restless. He did not want comfort without meaning. That restlessness followed him when he left Xerox for a smaller company selling kitchen equipment. On paper, it looked like a step down. In reality, it was a step closer to purpose. His job was to sell coffee machines to cafes across the country. It was technical, repetitive work. But Howard paid attention. While reviewing sales data, he noticed something unusual. One small customer in Seattle kept ordering far more machines than anyone else. The numbers didn't make sense. Curious, he decided to investigate. That decision would change his life. When Howard arrived in Seattle, he found a company unlike any he had seen before. It was small, quiet, focused. The people cared deeply about quality and craft. The company was called Starbucks. At that moment, Howard did not see a business opportunity. He felt a sense of recognition. For the first time, his determination had found direction, and the path ahead, though uncertain, had finally begun to take shape. He made a quiet promise to himself as a boy. If he ever had the chance to build something, it would be different. It would treat people as humans, not numbers. It would protect them instead of discarding them. At that time, he had no idea how that promise would take shape. He didn't know it would involve coffee. He didn't know it would become global. All he knew was that his past would not be his prison. Howard's childhood did not give him confidence. It gave him hunger. It did not give him privilege. It gave him empathy. It did not give him security. It gave him purpose. Many people believe their beginnings define their limits. Howard Schultz became proof that beginnings define direction, not destiny. The pain he witnessed as a child did not disappear. It became fuel. The feeling of being unseen became a lifelong mission to make others feel recognized. This is the first truth of his story. Where you start does not decide where you end. Sometimes it decides how fiercely you climb. And this was only the beginning. Finding direction does not guarantee acceptance. Sometimes it invites resistance. Howard Schultz joined Starbucks with curiosity, not control. He was not an owner. He was not a founder. He was an employee with an idea quietly forming in his mind. The company was small, focused, and disciplined. It sold coffee beans, grinders, and equipment. It did not serve drinks. That was not its identity. But Howard saw something else. In 1983, Starbucks sent him to Milan, Italy, for a trade show. What he encountered there was not a product. It was a way of life. Espresso bars filled the streets. People stood at counters, talked to baristas, laughed, argued, shared moments. Coffee was not consumed quickly. It was experienced. Howard did not see cups. He saw connection. He returned to Seattle transformed. The idea was clear in his mind. America didn't need better coffee beans. It needed places where people could belong, where strangers could pause, where routine could feel human. He walked into the Starbucks office energized, convinced that what he had seen could change everything. He shared his vision with the founders. Serve coffee, create spaces, let people stay. They listened carefully. Then they said no. The rejection was calm, almost polite, but it cut deeply. The founders believed Starbucks had a clear mission. They sold beans. They were not a cafe. They did not believe Americans would pay several dollars for a cup of coffee. The risk felt unnecessary. The idea felt foreign. Howard understood their logic, but he could not ignore his conviction. That moment marked the beginning of an internal conflict. Loyalty versus belief. Security versus purpose. Stay and suppress the vision, or leave and protect it. For months, the tension grew. Howard felt torn between admiration for the company and commitment to the idea he could not let go. He tried to adapt. He tried to wait. But the vision only became louder. Eventually, the truth became unavoidable. If Starbucks would not become what he believed it could be, he would have to build it himself. Leaving was not heroic. It was painful. In 1985, Howard walked away from the company he loved, carrying nothing but belief. He decided to create his own coffee bar inspired by Italy. Not a shop, an experience. But belief does not pay bills, and passion does not convince investors. What followed was rejection on repeat. He pitched his idea again and again. Investors smiled, then declined. Some laughed. Others dismissed him. They said Americans would never accept it. They said the price was too high. They said the culture would not translate. Howard heard no more times than he could count. But rejection did not surprise him. He had grown up with it. Each closed door hardened his resolve. Each dismissal tested his faith. And slowly, persistence did what persuasion could not. A few people began to listen. A few began to believe. Finally, after countless meetings, Howard raised enough money to open his first store. It was small. It was imperfect. But it was real. And it proved one thing beyond doubt. Vision rejected in one place may flourish in another. This was no longer an idea. It was a direction. And soon, fate would bring him back to the very door that once closed. In 1985, Howard walked away from the company he loved, carrying nothing but belief. He decided to create his own coffee bar inspired by Italy. Not a shop, an experience. But belief does not pay bills, and passion does not convince investors. What followed was rejection on repeat. He pitched his idea again and again. Investors smiled, then declined. Some laughed. Others dismissed him. They said Americans would never accept it. They said the price was too high. They said the culture would not translate. Howard heard no more times than he could count, but rejection did not surprise him. He had grown up with it. Each closed door hardened his resolve. Each dismissal tested his faith. And slowly, persistence did what persuasion could not. A few people began to listen. A few began to believe. Finally, after countless meetings, Howard raised enough money to open his first store. It was small. It was imperfect. But it was real. And it proved one thing beyond doubt. Vision rejected in one place may flourish in another. This was no longer an idea. It was a direction. And soon, fate would bring him back to the very door that once closed. Growth is often celebrated. Few talk about its cost. After acquiring Starbucks, Howard Schultz moved with focus and urgency. The early years were not about domination or speed. They were about consistency. Every store needed to feel the same emotionally, even if it looked different physically. Every customer needed to feel recognized. Every employee needed to feel valued. And it worked. Starbucks expanded city by city, not through franchising, but through ownership and control. Howard believed experience could not be outsourced. Culture could not be copied by contract. If Starbucks was going to grow, it would grow carefully. By the early 1990s, the brand had crossed an invisible line. It was no longer just a coffee company. It had become a habit, a routine, a symbol. People didn't just order coffee anymore. They learned new words: latte, cappuccino, macchiato. Slowly, Starbucks reshaped how Americans thought about their mornings. In 1992, the company went public. The IPO brought capital, visibility, and pressure. Starbucks was now accountable not only to customers and employees, but to Wall Street. Growth expectations accelerated. Expansion targets multiplied. Howard embraced ambition, but he felt tension. The company began opening stores faster than ever before. New cities, new regions, new markets. What once felt intimate now felt operational. Systems replaced instinct. Metrics replaced conversations. And cracks began to appear. Some stores still felt warm and personal. Others felt rushed and mechanical. Lines grew longer. Music felt generic. The ritual became routine. Howard sensed something was slipping away, but the momentum was difficult to slow. Success had created distance. In 2000, after nearly 2 decades of building Starbucks, Howard made a difficult decision. He stepped down as CEO. He believed the company was strong enough to move forward without him. He stayed on as chairman, hoping the culture he built would sustain itself. At first, the numbers looked good. Stores kept opening. Revenue increased. Stock prices rose. On the surface, everything was working. But beneath the surface, something essential was eroding. Starbucks was becoming efficient, predictable, polished, and less human. Howard visited stores quietly. He noticed baristas focused on speed, not connection. Customers felt processed, not welcomed. The third place he had fought to create was losing its soul. Then the world changed. By 2007, the global financial crisis arrived. Consumers cut spending. Coffee suddenly felt expensive. Traffic declined. Criticism grew louder. The brand that once symbolized modern comfort was now accused of excess. The numbers collapsed. Starbucks stock fell dramatically. Stores began closing. Thousands of employees lost their jobs. Confidence vanished almost overnight. Howard watched from the sidelines, frustrated and heartbroken. The company he built was struggling, not because people no longer wanted coffee, but because it had drifted too far from its purpose. Growth had delivered scale, but scale had diluted meaning, and in that moment of crisis, one truth became clear. The very values that built Starbucks were the only things that could save it. Soon, the board would turn back to the man who understood that better than anyone else. Crisis does not arrive gently. It exposes everything. By 2008, Starbucks was no longer the symbol of confidence it once was. The global financial crisis had shaken consumer behavior. What used to feel like a small daily comfort now felt like an unnecessary expense. Store traffic slowed. Sales declined. Public criticism intensified. The numbers told a brutal story. In less than a year, Starbucks' stock price collapsed from over $40 to under $8. Billions in value disappeared. Hundreds of stores were no longer profitable. Thousands of employees faced uncertainty. Morale inside the company eroded quickly. From the outside, it looked like a market problem. From the inside, it was something deeper. Howard Schultz was no longer CEO. He had stepped aside years earlier, trusting that the culture he built would protect the company. But as he visited stores quietly, what he saw disturbed him. Floors were dirty. Baristas were distracted. Customers felt rushed, unseen, forgettable. The Starbucks experience had lost its soul. Howard felt responsible, not legally, not operationally, but morally. This was not what he had promised himself as a boy. This was not the company he built to honor people. In January 2008, the board asked him to return. Howard did not come back as a hero. He came back as a firefighter. The situation was worse than the headlines suggested. The brand was diluted. The culture was fractured. Trust was broken. And the hardest truth was this: not everything could be saved. Howard began with decisions that shocked everyone. First, he closed hundreds of stores across the country, not because they were losing money, but because they no longer reflected the brand's values. Second, he halted all new expansion. Growth stopped completely. Third, he laid off thousands of employees. Each decision weighed heavily on him, but he understood the alternative was collapse. To send a message, Howard cut his own salary to $1. This was not symbolism. It was alignment. But the boldest move came next. Howard shut down every Starbucks store in the United States for an entire day. Over 7,000 locations closed simultaneously. Millions of dollars in revenue were sacrificed. Why? Retraining. Every barista returned to the basics: how to pull a proper espresso shot, how to respect the craft, how to slow down and reconnect. Howard told them, "This is not about technique. This is about pride." He removed products that damaged the coffee experience. Microwaved food disappeared. The smell of coffee returned. Stores were redesigned to feel warm again. Eye contact mattered. Conversations mattered. At the same time, Howard embraced the future. Mobile ordering, digital loyalty, free Wi-Fi. Innovation was no longer about speed alone, but about support. What Howard was rebuilding was not a menu. It was identity. The company began to stabilize, slowly, painfully, but genuinely. The lesson was clear. Leadership is not about protecting growth. It is about protecting meaning, even when it hurts. And for the first time in years, Starbucks began to feel like itself again. Saving the company was only the beginning. The deeper question was what Starbucks should stand for next. As stability returned, Howard Schultz understood something important. If Starbucks focused only on recovery and profit, it would repeat the same mistake that nearly destroyed it. Numbers could rise again, but without purpose, the culture would slowly hollow out. Howard believed that a company of Starbucks' size carried weight, influence, responsibility. So he shifted the conversation. Starbucks would not simply sell coffee well. It would try to do good, visibly and consistently. Not as marketing, not as a campaign, but as a principle. The first focus was people, not customers, but employees. Howard expanded education programs, allowing partners to earn college degrees while working. He strengthened healthcare benefits and mental health support, especially during uncertain economic times. He reinforced the idea that dignity at work was not optional. Then he looked outward. Starbucks committed to ethical sourcing, investing heavily in fair trade practices and long-term relationships with coffee farmers. The company worked directly with growers in Latin America, Africa, and Asia to ensure fair pay, stable conditions, and sustainable farming. Coffee was no longer just a supply chain. It was a shared ecosystem. Environmental responsibility followed. Starbucks invested in recycling initiatives, waste reduction, and sustainable packaging. These changes were costly and complex, but Howard believed short-term expense was worth long-term impact. The company also took public stances that many corporations avoided, hiring veterans, supporting refugees, promoting diversity and inclusion, even when it drew criticism. Howard knew not everyone would agree, but neutrality, in his view, was a decision too. He once said, "We are not in business to make money alone. We are in business to elevate humanity." This philosophy was not theoretical. It came from memory. Howard never forgot his father, a man injured at work and discarded without help, a man reduced to silence because the system saw him as replaceable. Starbucks's employee-first approach was built as an answer to that pain. As the company stabilized, public trust slowly returned. Customers noticed the difference. Stores felt human again. Baristas felt proud again. The brand began to stand for something beyond convenience. By the early 2010s, Starbucks had fully recovered financially. Revenue grew. Stock prices rose. Global presence expanded. But Howard measured success differently now. He watched how partners treated customers. He watched how stores served communities. He watched whether people still felt seen. Starbucks had become more than a company. It was a platform, a daily ritual, a place where millions paused, connected, and felt acknowledged. And in that moment, Howard understood the evolution of leadership. First, you build. Then, you protect. Finally, you give back. The company had survived collapse. Now it was being asked to contribute meaning. And that responsibility, Howard believed, was the true test of success. There comes a moment when building is no longer the hardest part. Letting go is. By the late 2010s, Starbucks had become one of the most recognizable brands in the world. Tens of thousands of stores, hundreds of thousands of employees, a presence in dozens of countries. Financially, the company was strong. Culturally, it had regained its footing. Howard Schultz had achieved what many consider impossible, and yet he knew his role was changing. In 2017, Howard stepped down as CEO once again, this time by choice. Not because the company was failing, not because the pressure was too heavy, but because leadership, in his view, was not about permanence. It was about timing. He believed that organizations, like people, need renewal, new energy, new perspectives. His task was no longer to expand Starbucks, but to protect the values that allowed it to exist. Howard did not disappear. He continued to walk into stores quietly, without announcements or titles. He observed. He listened. He watched moments unfold. A barista remembering a regular's name, a student studying late into the night, a tired worker finding calm in a familiar space. These were not transactions. They were human exchanges. For Howard, this was the true measure of success. Not revenue, not market share, but whether people felt seen in small, ordinary moments. He often reflected on where it all began. A cramped apartment, a father injured and forgotten, a child learning early what it meant to feel invisible. Starbucks was never meant to erase that pain. It was meant to respond to it. Over time, Howard shifted his focus beyond the company. He invested his energy in social impact, education, veterans' employment, and economic opportunity. He believed business could be a force for healing, not just efficiency. Even when he explored ideas outside Starbucks, including public service, the motivation remained the same. Leadership was not about control, it was about responsibility. Howard once said that success without humanity is empty. His life became evidence of that belief. He did not build the largest coffee company simply to dominate a market. He built it to create spaces where people could pause, connect, and feel acknowledged. Today, Starbucks continues without him at the center. That was always the plan. A true legacy does not depend on presence. It depends on principles that survive departure. Howard Schultz proved that where you begin does not determine where you end, that rejection can sharpen vision, that growth must be guided by values, and that businesses, when led with empathy, can touch lives far beyond their products. This story was never about coffee. It was about dignity. It was about being seen. And perhaps, most importantly, it was a reminder that whatever you choose to build, what remains after you step away, is what truly matters. That is legacy. This story was never just about coffee, success, or a famous brand. It was about what happens when pain is turned into purpose, and when success is guided by humanity. Howard Schultz showed that where you begin does not decide where you end, and that leadership is not measured by power, but by the lives you touch. Long after titles fade and numbers change, what remains is how people felt in your presence. If this story reached you, remember this: you don't need permission to start, and you don't need perfection to matter. What you build with heart will always outlive what you build with ego.